Support.
Strong support, please proceed.
I just wanted to make a few comments so everybody knows what this is about. This was, the impetus, this came out last week on the Committee on Public Safety, whose area is, quote, relating to civilian emergency and disaster response, end quote, from our House rules, was simply looking at ways to prepare emergency responses for natural disasters, and that included something I'd spoken on the floor about before, relating to Aloha Tower and having that area serve as a container shipping yard, because the state right now has very little plans, if any, for that kind of disaster response preparedness for, say, a hurricane or a tsunami or some kind of, say, terrorist attack or something in the harbor. And we decided to simply add on to that. Oh yeah, by the way, our fallout shelters are non-existent anymore, and we should probably restock them. So that's all it's about. And last but not least, there's been, I think, a lot of confusion about, you know, God forbid we ever need plans like this, but, you know, if a strong nuclear power were to target our area, we would have very little, if any, chance of survival. But if it was something like a 15 to 20 kiloton that were to strike, the size of Hiroshima or Nagasaki, you know, the blast radius of such a weapon is 1 to 3 miles, which is immense and enormous and hard to even imagine. But that means hundreds of thousands of people left to survive, and it's our responsibility in public safety to try to make sure that we have some kind of disaster preparedness plan. That's all. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Any further discussion? Members? Yes, Representative Ward.
Rise in support.
In support, please proceed.
And may the words of the previous speaker be edited into the journal as my own.
Absolutely. So ordered.
Speaker, I think it's so timely for this resolution to be put before this body, and I know it's going to go to finance. But it's something that, as the Carl Vinson, the aircraft carrier, has either arrived or is steaming near the South Korean, North Korean nations, that we be alert to what's going. If anything is to happen, we be prepared. The Ricky Ellison of the Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance briefed both the House and the Senate last year. They made a very clear point about the very clear and present danger that Hawaii is 12 minutes away from any missile that comes from North Korea. All the media has been saying, well, we are so far from getting the technology to reach the mainland. Well, we ain't the mainland. We are Hawaii, and 12 minutes away. Mr. Speaker, you can't get in your car and get to the McDonald's down the street in 12 minutes. Speaker, this is a very timely thing. It's not that we want to be overreactive and make fear out of it, but preparedness, Mr. Speaker. That's the intent of this, and I commend the authors of it, and I hope that we pass it through into the Finance Committee and that we are prepared for what otherwise looks like there's a lot of shaking going on in the Pacific area because of this. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you very much, Representative.
Political leaders in Hawaii are reviewing plans for emergency plans in case they are attacked. Does the President believe that the level of tension between the United States and North Korea is at the point where we should start reviewing emergency attack plans?
So just to be clear, and again, I'm not going to get into, I would just tell you that there are military contingency plans for almost every scenario in a numerous aspects around the world, here at home, everything from humanitarian relief to refugee crises to attacks. That is standard military procedure to have those kind of things. So to make that in any way, shape, or form sound new would be a mistake. It is a standard operating procedure of the military to plan for contingencies in a number of operations in a number of hotspots throughout the world on a regular basis. And with respect to Korea in particular, that's been going on for decades.
I'm just wondering, how high does the President view the threat level from North Korea?
Again, I think the President's made clear we're aware of the activities that they've engaged in, and we're monitoring them, and the National Security Team continues to keep them up to date.
Just one more on that topic. One of the reasons why successive administrations has chosen to negotiate with the leaders of North Korea is because it's believed that there are no good military options to deal with. Does this President believe that there are viable military options for dealing with North Korea?
Again, I'm not. I understand that, but I think taking anything on or off the table in itself limiting your options to some degree. And so I'm not going to even discuss that.
We have so many important issues on our minds, and one of them on my mind is the issue of war and peace. And I wonder what, in your opinion, the U.S. government response should be to North Korea's testing of missiles, and what impact Congress can have on our president's decision.
The first thing I'll say is that because I've been briefed in a classified setting about this, there are certain things I just can't talk about, except to say, I think that you should let me do the worrying, and I don't think this should worry you every morning. There is not zero risk, but this is not the kind of thing that you should be sort of daily wringing your hands over. We have multiple defenses in multiple places and multiple venues, and I feel that this is, like I said, not a zero risk proposition, but low enough that I don't think this should be a daily concern for folks. Where I do have a concern is that the president has no plan at all when it comes to North Korea. One of the reasons I voted for General Mattis as the Secretary of Defense is that, you know, he may be conservative, he may be a SecDef, and so there's a sort of typology you get with a Secretary of Defense, Mad Dog Mattis, you know, sort of a Marine Corps general. He's not going to be a pro-peace guy in the same way that many of the people in this room are, but he is a grown-up, and he does not want a cataclysmic, what they call kinetic engagement, which is a euphemism for a hot war. And so there are a few people in that room, H.R. McMaster and Secretary Mattis, who are sensible in the sense that nobody will win in a kinetic engagement with North Korea. Now, normally you would work your diplomatic channels, right? And you do your warfighting plans as a contingency, and then if there's anything else that we can do. On the warfighting plans, like I said, we have them, but they're awful, right? Not just for us, but for our allies in the region and our friends in South Korea. There would be no way to avoid a catastrophic event in South Korea, maybe not a nuclear one, but they certainly have enough in the way of traditional munitions to do great harm to many, many people. So that's the warfighting side of this. On the missile defense side and other ways to stop them from doing what they're doing, I'll just say that we're doing everything that can be done. On the diplomatic channel side, I think that this bluster is unhelpful. And I am not as sanguine as other people are about the likelihood that China will intervene helpfully. That has become a sort of trope among people in sort of left, right, and center. It's like we're supposed to talk to President Xi and then he's supposed to deal with this. My own judgment is that A, they're disinclined to do so, and B, there's not as much that they can do as we may be hoping they can do. So this is a very difficult situation, but it is probably not as bad as it looked on Friday night.
Thank you.
But there's one issue that's been in the news quite a bit lately that I wanted to just bring up front, and that is the issue of North Korea and what has been happening there. As Darrell mentioned, I serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Asia Pacific Subcommittee, as well as the Middle East Subcommittee. And this has been an issue that I focused on quite a bit, actually, ever since I was elected and sworn in as a member of Congress back in January of 2013. Even then, I had recognized the increasing threat and capabilities coming from North Korea. And yes, the threat that poses to the United States overall, but more specifically, the threat that poses to us here in Hawaii, given we are the most forward point for our country in the Pacific. We are the closest in proximity to North Korea. What was quite astounding to me on one of the first official congressional trips that I took with other members of Congress to the Asia Pacific region was how few members of Congress are aware of how large the Pacific Ocean is. They kept commenting in the plane, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" So it was important for them. They stopped here in Hawaii and got a sense of a short time, but got a sense of Hawaii and where we are. But they also, prior to this trip, were not even aware that North Korea was a nuclear-armed country. Disturbing, to say the least. Senior members of Congress who were traveling on this trip did not know that North Korea was nuclear-armed. They were not aware that North Korea has developed over the years intercontinental ballistic missile capabilities that put Hawaii directly within range of those capabilities, and that those threats have directly been made. So from that point and continuing on, especially now, I've been very focused on, both through the Foreign Affairs and Armed Services Committees, raising this level of awareness and pushing for defense of Hawaii in particular. Given North Korea's most recent actions, most recent escalation, I'm urging my colleagues, our Hawaii delegation, our leadership here in the state of Hawaii, and urging all of you to help raise voices as we try to get urgent action to make sure that the appropriate capabilities are in place for the defense and protection of Hawaii in particular. This is something that we can't afford to take lightly.
I served in Korea in the 70s, and I know how the North Koreans are, because I served at the DMZ side by side with the ROK Armed Forces and our forces. And to tell you the truth, if I was to give you guys information how sensitive the North Koreans are, anything will touch them off, anything. Okay, you spit on the ground, they'll shoot you. You take their picture, they'll shoot you, okay? Stuff like that. So what I'm saying is that we should not provoke the North Korean leader, because I have firsthand experience by serving there, and I know how they are. We are prepared, our forces are prepared with the ROK Army, ROK, which is Republic of Korea Armed Forces. We're all prepared to do whatever we have to do, but all I'm saying tonight is that we should not provoke the North Korean leader, because that's what they train for. They train for war.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're exactly right about what the consequences of provocation are. And you know, some people make the mistake of saying, well, Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, he's a lunatic. He's crazy. But I have heard from many experts, and when you look at the situation, and you realize, well, his actions follow a certain form of logic. And it speaks back to this common thread that's come up throughout the night about regime change war. North Korea has nuclear weapons as a deterrent to regime change. That is why they refuse to let go of their nuclear weapons. And when they look at what we did in Libya with Gaddafi, when an agreement was made, say, okay, you denuclearize, we're not going to come after you, we're going to allow you to remain in power. And then very soon after, we came in, launched another regime change war, toppled him, he was dragged through the street. North Korea is watching this, saying, okay, why should we trust anything when our country has this track record of regime change? So again, our policies have consequences. So now that we here in Hawaii are staring down the barrel, essentially, of a nuclear threat from North Korea, we've got to think through clearly and understand exactly what's going on here. That it's not just a lone actor, but there are, again, consequences to our policies in the past, and the policies that we are still playing out today in Syria, that we are still seeing play out today in Syria.
My question is about North Korea. I know you've already answered or spoken to this a lot, but I was just wondering, what is the level of threat that we're currently under? And I guess what always gets to me the most, this goes back to what you're saying in the beginning, is that every time I turn on the international news or the national news, it's always, does Kim Jong-un have a intercontinental ballistic missile capable of hitting New York or capable of hitting California? I've been hearing that for like 3 years. Every time I turn on the news, can he hit New York? We're not, we're over here. So, and he's made his hatred of the U.S. and he just his will to target us quite clear. And so I guess my question is, what do we do? Are we building a bomb shelter or like buying gas masks? And yeah, anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Every single time we discuss the issue of North Korea in either of the committees that I'm on, my opening line generally is, I represent Hawaii's 2nd Congressional District, and North Korea's intercontinental ballistic missiles can hit Hawaii. No one's really talked about North Korea yet and how the various courses of action that are being suggested here will impact the very direct threat that we face from North Korea, and the reality that any resolution to North Korea's situation will require the engagement and cooperation of China in that. So I'd love to just hear each of your thoughts on specifically how you suggest your suggested course of action will impact and the threat we face from North Korea. We start with Dr. Chang.
Representative, frankly, I don't see any solution to North Korea because the North Korean regime has associated itself with retaining its nuclear capability, and China has repeatedly demonstrated for pretty much the last 30 years it has no intention of solving the North Korean problem, particularly for the United States. And the reality is that North Korea's nuclear weapons aren't aimed at China. They are aimed at Japan, South Korea, and the United States, which from the Chinese perspective is not a great solution, but not necessarily a particularly troubling one. I will note, however, that the one time that anything was done that truly caught the North Korean regime's attention was when we shut down Banco Delta Asia by using the financial networks to force the Chinese, again, to make that choice. The millions of dollars that they gained from working with North Korea were the billions of dollars in financial flows that would otherwise occur. Unfortunately, after less than a year, we decided that those sanctions were too dangerous to continue and sustain against North Korea.
Thank you.
Congresswoman, thank you. I'd agree with my colleague. I would say, however, I'd modify it slightly to say that there are no good solutions to North Korea. There are lots of bad solutions to North Korea. And I agree entirely that we have to give up the fiction that China wants in any way to solve North Korea, certainly for our own purposes. I would say, however, that given the increasing erratic nature of the Kim Jong-un regime, the assassination of his half-brother, who was protected by China just a few weeks ago in Malaysia, as well as the assassination in 2014 or 13 of Chang Song-tek, who was Kim Jong-un's uncle, but more importantly, China's main agent in North Korea, means that Beijing is as worried about their influence as we are worried about our lack of. And there may be opportunities out of pure self-interest, which is a fine thing, for the two of us to figure out ways of pressuring that regime, or at least talking more creatively about how to contain it. At some point, by the way, we are going to have to decide when we declare it a nuclear power. It is a nuclear power. I understand that we do not want to shred the non-proliferation regime, but we're going to have to wake up to reality one day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I agree with what Dean and Misha have said already, that this is not a problem with a solution. I mean, it's really trying to maximize or optimize a bad situation. And unfortunately, what drives this situation the most is the behavior of North Korea, which no country outside of North Korea has real control over, including the Chinese. I believe that the Chinese have moved in their position towards a greater degree of cooperation and support in dealing with North Korea. They certainly wouldn't fully endorse everything that the United States might want to see toward North Korea for legitimate national security interests of their own, as well as other interests which may not be, as from our perspective, as legitimate. But I do think that we have choices here. We have the policy thus far has not worked. So we need to think about a new way of addressing this issue. We can't simply regard the Chinese as being the panacea, that they're going to solve it, because they're not going to solve it. So we have to think about how we can work with the Chinese, the South Koreans, and the Japanese to deal with it. We have two different paths that we can go. One of them is towards a greater degree of unified sanctions against North Korea in the hope that the regime will collapse or give up its nuclear weapons. I think that's very unlikely. I think they're committed to these weapons, and they're not likely to give them up. And they're going to continue to move towards a deliverable ICBM capability with a nuclear warhead. And when they get close to that capability, the question is, what do we do about that? And in my view, the only thing that one can do is you have to make a choice between being, well, you can combine both. You can be extremely clear about the consequences of any use or threat of use of a nuclear weapon by North Korea, that it involved the destruction of North Korea, and that this applies to threats to South Korea and to Japan, our allies, for whom we have a nuclear umbrella. And at the same time, however, I think we have to consider whether or not it's possible to develop a diplomatic strategy in which you address each of the concerns that the North Koreans have said that they have on their security front. Many people say this is all useless because the North Koreans will ignore all this and continue to take advantage of it. But you can make the argument that the United States and the other powers have not fully tried to implement what you call an omnibus approach to North Korea that would give them, over a period of time, in response to certain actions that they would take, a certain level of benefits for them, economic and diplomatic.
So the question is it's not a theoretical question. It is a reality that people here in our state, people here in my district experience and understand and take seriously. Slowly, people are starting to hear and starting to pay a little bit more attention, but this is something that I'm continuing to push back very strongly against, to educate our decision makers about the fact that we've got the 50th state out here that is already within range. There are a number of things that can and should be done. We've passed stronger sanctions bills against the North Korean regime, the elites in particular. But the challenge is that many of these sanctions bills, even passed by Congress, have not been truly enforced. Or if they have, they've only been enforced for a small window of time, so that once you actually start seeing an impact in curbing the escalation and curbing the actions of the North Korean leadership, the sanctions were lifted prematurely. So that's one area that needs to be fully executed. China has a very critical role to play in this, given the fact that much of the North Korean regime's economy comes still through China and their borders and banks associated with China. So there are other diplomatic means that need to be pushed through in order to try to deal with this threat. Meanwhile, here in Hawaii, what can we do? What should we do? Through my work on the committees, we've already started last year to get legislation passed, and we are working urgently now to make sure that we have a defensive system in place for Hawaii. It's not to say that we will have an ironclad shield of protection, but we need to have a strong missile defense capability here in Hawaii. The mainland, they've got a number of systems in place to protect the mainland. We've got to make sure that we have one specifically for Hawaii that could shoot down a missile should it come our way. Right now on Kauai, her question is, do we have that capability today? Hawaii does not have the capability today to shoot down a defensive missile that could intercept one coming towards us. There are others on the mainland that do have that capability to protect Hawaii, but I am pushing for Hawaii to have that capability ourselves. Without getting into too much of the details of how all these systems work, on Kauai at the Pacific Missile Range facility that currently tests a lot of the different types of defensive weapon systems that our country has. We are working to basically see what we can do to put a defensive system in operational, not a test site, but an operational site for the protection of Hawaii. Thank you.
It's an entirely unpredictable and reckless foreign policy that appears to be, I mean, the latest thing is that this USS Carl Vinson, which they claimed was going in one direction, was literally going in the opposite direction. That's not a trivial thing. I mean, Donald Trump called it an armada going into the East China Sea area, and apparently it was just not. And the idea that we have a president, even the ones that I've strongly disagreed with, that level of daily lying is unusual and reckless.
John, on the USS Carl Vinson, what happened? Can you take us through the events from the perspective of the White House that led to the miscommunication, this administration thinking that this vessel was thousands of miles away from its actual location?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the last part?
Can you take us through the events that led people within this administration to believe the vessel was thousands of miles away from its actual location?
Well, I mean, PACOM put out a release talking about the group ultimately ending up in the Korean Peninsula. That's what it will do. I think we were asked very clearly about the use of a carrier group in terms of deterrence and foreign presence and what that meant. I think that's what we discussed. I would refer you back to any other issues with that to the Department of Defense.
Does the president believe that he might have spoken too quickly on this location of the vessel before it was actually
arriving? The president said that we have an armada going towards the peninsula. That's a fact. It happened. It is happening, rather. Yeah.
John, I just want to follow up on that. You know, obviously when the President of the United States says there's military hardware going to a region in the middle of a crisis on the Korean Peninsula, the allies of the United States are encouraged. When that happens to not be the case, they can interpret that as a false encouragement. So how is this White House explaining to South Korea and Japan that in fact during the buildup and the actual DPRK missile launch, there was no USS Carl Vinson off the
well, respectfully,
Korean
Jessica, I would
Peninsula?
ask you to either touch base with PACOM or the Department of Defense. The statement that was put out was that the Carl Vinson group was headed to the Korean Peninsula. It is headed to the Korean Peninsula. It'll arrive there. What's that?
It's headed there now. It wasn't headed there
Sure,
last
no,
week.
but that's not what we ever said. We said that it was heading there, and it was heading there. It is heading there. So that remains.
That allies had.
But if there's an impression, then that's not. Then there should have been clarification from people who were seeking it. But I mean, PACOM put out a release talking about what its ultimate destination was going to be, and that's where it ended up. Caitlin.
Well, why did the administration never clarify? Because it definitely, the intent in media reports was that it was headed there now, and now it's going to be there 2 weeks later.
But that wasn't, with all due respect, that's not my, we were asked a question. I know, no, that's not true. What I was asked was what signal did it send that it was going there? And I answered that question correctly at the time, that it signaled foreign presence, strength, and a reassurance to our allies. That's a true statement. You're asking me why you didn't know better. I don't know. That's a question that should have been followed up with either PACOM or the Department of Defense. But the only question that we were asked was what signal it sends, and I think we answered that very correctly at the time.
I think it was a little misleading. No one found out about it until a picture was posted on a page.
What do you mean? What part is misleading? I'm trying to figure that out. We were asked a question about what signal it sent. We answered the question on what signal it sent. I'm not the one who commented on timing.
What's misleading is that people thought it was headed there now, and now it's going to be there weeks later. They thought it was already headed there. And it
But
wasn't.
again,
It was doing
that's
an exercise.
I understand the question, right? But what I'm getting at is, it was announced that it was going. It will be there. We were asked simply a question on that. I think all other questions should be asked of the Department of Defense. John.
Thanks a lot, Sean. Earlier today, China's foreign ministry spokesman said that China is increasingly frustrated with North Korea. And North Korea, you may have seen it, put out a simulated video over the past 24 hours which shows its missiles attacking, destroying an American city. What's the American White House reaction to that video and also to the comments by China's foreign ministry spokesperson?
Well, the first part, this isn't the first time that North Korea has put out propaganda tools, and I don't think we're going to comment on every time they put out a piece of propaganda. Second, I think it's encouraging to see China continue to move forward and join us in this effort to control North Korea. I've commented before, I think that the relationship that the president started building with President Xi down in Mar-a-Lago is clearly showing some positive signs. China continues to have both economic and political influence over China, and so I think it's important to see them heading in this direction. I think it's a very positive sign to see them play a larger and larger role. I think it is in everybody's interest to contain North Korea's actions. John gives a...
How strong is that influence? I'm sorry, John. How strong is that influence, though, if the foreign ministry spokesman for China, which the president is depending on for this particular incursion, is saying that he himself, that China itself is frustrated, increasingly frustrated with the North Koreans?
Well, again, I think from an overall diplomatic sense, I think it's a positive to see China continue to take positive signs aligning with the position that we have on this. That's a positive thing. I think that time will tell, but I think seeing a unified effort to contain North Korea's threat is a positive step to protect not only our national security interests, but those in the region.